Welcome back. I'm Kimberly, she's Fulyana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec. Today we've got one of our international series, and we're talking to Bishoy Tadros, and he is at the moment in Portugal, but normally based in the US, and he's going to take us on a journey, some of his journey, and some that he would like you to travel as well with him. So welcome, Bishoy.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
There are a number of videos around that people can go and have a look and see you talking and talking about your early history. So I don't really want to drag you back through that, other than to say that you have travelled a path and you have met some challenges, as has the family around you. And we determined in our early discussions that today we would talk about three things: about patience, perspective and purpose. The first of those things that we want to find out from you is, what do you think is the most critical of those three that you should have?
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you for alluding to that. My story is out there, and I should mention that I am in the final stages now of publishing my very first book, which I'm very excited about. That'll be the go-to point for everybody. It's going to be called Break Barriers, and it should be out this summer. So I'm, again, in the final stages of wrapping that up right now.
Fantastic.
To circle back to your question, out of the three, each are very, very important. But, if you were to put a gun to my head and say, pick one, I would probably have to say purpose. Because the way that I look at purpose is, it's essentially, the more you look to seek out your purpose, the more likely you're going to be to identify strengths and moments of weakness. And for me, personally, it's those times where I've really exited my comfort zone and I've done things that have made me ultimately uncomfortable, whether it was physically, mentally, or emotionally, that have driven successes in various areas of my life.
Yeah. So we've talked, we're great Simon Sinek fans, so we've talked in previous podcasts about discovering your why, and I actually looked at a video just not long ago where you talked about the same sort of thing, about discovering your why in the middle of the end of the try that you were doing. And we've had some triathletes on the podcast as well, some local ones here from Australia, and they've talked about the same thing, about particularly getting into the run and realising that you've just got to go one more kilometre, one thing at a time. We've talked a lot about breaking down the overwhelm situations into things where you can have purpose. How do you maintain enthusiasm for the little tasks when you've got that purpose as your focus?
It's a progression. Uh-huh. So what happened with me was, the very first time I put myself in that arena, I very slowly started to uncover areas of potential. So, I'll go back to the very first ever race that I ran. Once I completed that, it was this feeling of, oh my God, I can run a half marathon. Yeah. And prior to that, a year ago, I thought to myself, no, 13 miles, that's crazy. I'm not a runner. I don't run. And, if I run 13 miles, does that mean I have to keep on running afterwards for more races? And so that was my very first race. And so I didn't necessarily get an itch after that race, but I just realized that I can do something that I never thought I could do in my entire life before.
Yeah, that's
the problem with that is that it continued to escalate. So I would keep doing things until ultimately, like you said, you alluded to the half Ironman that I did in 2017, and so that was a 70-mile race, and for me that was beyond crazy. For 5 months I shut things down. I didn't have a social life. My mother was concerned. She said to me, you're spending all this time in the gym. Can you focus a little bit more on maybe finding a girlfriend? And so I took a lot of heat for those 5 months. And when people kept asking me, they say, Bishoy, why are you doing this? And I really had no answer for them. What happened was, when I got to race day that June, you never really know if you're fully prepared for any of those kind of races. For me, the way that I kind of took it on was, the training is the hard part, right? So those 5 months where you're in the gym twice a day, where you're waking up early in the morning, where you're jumping in a cold pool when it's cold outside, where you're pushing your boundaries in terms of mileage, that's the hard part. The race day is supposed to be the easy part. And so I got on the bike, and it was 93 degrees outside in Maryland. And forgive me for not having conversion because I'm
you're right.
talking in Fahrenheit.
No, we're old. We remember when we had Fahrenheit in this country,
Yes.
so it's fine.
All right. So I finished the swim in about an hour and 7 minutes, which is about normal time. It was not great, but for me, the swim was supposed to be the hard part. And then I got on the bike, and about 40 miles into the bike ride, I had probably the biggest breakdown I've ever had in my life, where I looked down, there was not a single rider around me, my bike was pretty much done. It was like riding in quicksand at that point. I had salt all over my skin because I was completely dehydrated. And I got myself to a point where now I was asking myself the same exact question that everybody else was asking me for the last 5 months. It was like, Bishoy, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
What possessed you to sign up for this race, to give up the last 5 months of your life, and to just find yourself in the middle of nowhere, Maryland, completely dehydrated, and not a soul in sight? And at that very moment, I actually didn't even have the answer. But I knew one thing. The one thing was, I have to finish this race.
Yeah.
And so the way that I finished the race, to your point, was I had to compartmentalize it and break down the remaining 30 miles of the race into 1 mile markers, essentially. And that was the only way that I was going to finish it, by setting small goals ahead of myself in order to get to the finish line. It was when I crossed the finish line, it finally clicked that my entire life I had been holding on to this mantra of overcoming obstacles.
Yeah.
And I had never spoke about it with anybody. And the fact that I just proved to myself that I can finish something so absurd like this 70-mile race,
Yeah.
the universe was finally telling me, it's time to share your story. And it was that year when I ran the New York City Marathon, right after that, where I finally decided to come out and share the story.
That's great. Did you at that point stop to think how many other obstacles you absolutely conquered without you counting?
Yes. At that point, I think what kept me going and what made me, as a person, because of everything that I went through as a child, quitting was never an option. But it was at that point where I really had to dig deeper than ever to basically bring back memories of times where I was close to quitting, but I just continued to push through.
That's good.
And also an opportunity for you to realise that you were doing this yourself, that there was no support mechanism around you to help you through that process, that this was something that you could do and you had done on your own.
I joke around with people because I had my phone in my compression shorts at the time, and look, my mom was at the finish. My parents were at the finish line.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where I thought to myself, do I just call my mother? I'm 30 years old. I'm about to call my mother and tell her I want to go home.
That's good.
Yeah, and I joked around, but I could never do that because I would never be able to live that down, of course. But
oh no, we know about Middle Eastern mothers. Fulyana has a Middle Eastern mother.
Yes, my mother would be expecting me to.
So I'm sure my mom was expecting me. I mean, the only reason why my mom was there was just to make sure that I made it out alive. So
Yeah.
She was there. That was it. She was definitely more concerned that the whole setup of a race that intense. So I think she was looking forward to my call, but I wasn't going to let her have that.
In that sense, you had purpose and you had patience in terms of looking at achieving those smaller goals all the way through that last bit of the run. The perspective side of things, that gave you obviously a different perspective on your why, on what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. What drives you now? Is it the perspective that drives you now?
Yeah, so with regards to perspective, that's the one that really channels back to my childhood.
Okay.
So just a quick background for the folks on the podcast. Yeah, as a child, I was born in Egypt. I was diagnosed with leukemia as a 3-year-old child, and my parents had to up and leave everything that they knew in order to move to the States for me to get treatment. Beyond that, the situation or the circumstances of my family are fairly unique. My father is a Coptic Orthodox priest, and so the dynamics of my family are are not the norm. So here we are, an immigrant family. My father has a unique position. I am a cancer patient, and I'm moving to the States. And between the ages of 3 to 13, I'm undergoing treatment. I have various setbacks. I have a brain surgery. And, as I'm sure everybody knows, kids in that age range can be cruel. And so I didn't necessarily fit in, whether it was culturally, physically, socially, emotionally. And I had to navigate all of that as a child. So when I talk about overcoming obstacles, I talk about the big picture of how it affects almost every arena of your life. After I got that clean bill of health and I really decided that, nothing was going to get in my way at that point, where I had to kind of look back and understand that things happen for a reason. And I truly do believe that. And I do believe that you're not really given anything that you couldn't handle in life. And so when I look back at all of that and how difficult those times were for me, the foundation that they built, it gives me perspective now on why no goal I put in front of me is not necessarily something that I couldn't accomplish. And I take that to heart in every arena of my life now. Even professionally, there have been multiple times where I've been told that I can't do something that I wanted to do, and every single time, I basically look around, I say, here, hold my cup of coffee and watch me go. And so that's really where the perspective lies. The perspective lies in understanding that I've been able to accomplish so much that now it's just a matter of applying it to my future steps.
Okay, so in that sense, you set out with your career at your feet to start with. How do you determine the path that you want to follow?
It's interesting. So with my career, I had gone to a very small state school in upstate New York. It had a very good reputation academically. It was called SUNY Geneseo. But the thing about it was I always wanted to work on Wall Street. And I graduated in 2009, right in the heart of the financial crisis. And the school I went to actually had no real ties to Wall Street at the time, no ties to the banks and the asset management firms, etc. And I'll never forget, I went to a career counselor's office and I had told her what I wanted to do, and she basically looked at me and she said, well, we don't do that here. And I looked at her and my jaw kind of dropped, because I thought to myself, oh my God, I just wasted the last 4 years of my life, and I'm not going to be able to get to where I want to go. And on top of that, the market was just so horrible. And so I graduated college unemployed, and at that point I had to get tactical. And this is a lot of where, the patience element came in too. I realized that no one was going to pick me up off the street and say, hey, here's a high-paying job at, a big investment bank. So I started off by working for a recruiting agency that placed public accountants, and I had an accounting degree. And after doing that for a year, I had networked well enough to eventually get myself a job as a public accountant. While I was doing that, I was doing my MBA simultaneously at Fordham University. And as I was doing my MBA, I had come across a friend of mine who worked at JP Morgan. And he said to me, hey, we have an opening on our desk. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said to me, well, we manage risk for exotic interest rate derivatives.
Yeah, good.
And I look at him and I'm like, wait, what? Can you repeat that again? To me, that sounded like a pure pickup line. I had no idea.
Did you try it out though? Did you use it to see if it was?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I told him, I said, Mike, just get me the interview and let me figure this out. So he got me the interview. I studied just enough. And I got into the interview and I realized that the person that I was interviewing with, you could tell, was extremely intelligent. However, he was a little soft-spoken. So I thought to myself, so long as I can dominate this conversation in terms of, not necessarily, I can't talk myself into trouble. I just have to talk long enough and socialize long enough where he's not going to ask too many questions, that maybe I'll have a chance. And that's exactly how it ended up playing out. The problem was, once I got the job and I got in there, I looked around and here I was now. This was 3 years later. This was 3 years of digging my way to where I wanted to go. And I finally got in through the door. But I looked around and I realized I'm in the biggest investment bank in America,
Yeah.
and I don't have the slightest clue of what is going on. And I'm looking around, and I'm surrounded by people that could double as physicists and engineers because of their ability mathematically. And I realized that I had to stay quiet for 6 months because I would be exposed if anybody found out how little I actually knew about what was going on. And so I did that, and what I realized throughout that time is that while these people are very, very intelligent and they're really good at what they do, the one arena where I think I could differentiate myself is I can communicate effectively. And so I thought to myself, there is no reason why anybody should be head scratching when they hear the phrase exotic interest rate derivatives. There should be a way to simplify it. We're not saving the world here, so we shouldn't be making what we do so complex.
Yep.
And so I had made it a point to figure out a way to deliver the content to younger people that are coming into the bank, interns, analysts, to speak to managers and deliver the content from the desk in a more effective manner. And that's essentially how I differentiated myself to the point where a couple years later, when I was looking to go on to my next role in the bank, I had basically said, look, if I can deliver effectively to all our stakeholders, there's no reason why I can't do this with our clients. And that was my positioning point to move into my next role, where I was in a more front office kind of a capacity.
Yep. At this point, we're going to take a break in our discussion with Bishoy. We thank him so far for all of the things that he has shared with us and the things that he's given us to think about already in our discussion. But for now, we will end part 1 of our discussion. I'm Kim Bailey, she's Fulyana Osborne. We've been talking with Bishoy Tadros, and this is Inside Exec.